discussion. Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our daily Talmud discussion, Chabura. Today is Tuesday, the 27th of Tammuz, July 26th, and we're here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, on the cusp of turning to page 128. We are still talking about the types of barrels, the type of baskets that can be moved around on Shabbos to create a space for guests and for Torah study or other mitzvah-oriented needs. And although you're allowed to do so, even though there is tircha involved, and generally speaking, we don't want tircha, we are willing to, the Chazal never created restrictions of tircha when it comes to Shabbos, but there are also muksa issues. Do you have any conceivable way or likelihood of using the item? So depending on what's inside those baskets, there's a great degree of variability on if you can use it and why you can use it and when you can use it. So yesterday we talked about truma, which is an item that's really only available for the Kohen, but any Israelite, we said, could move it because ultimately it is available to the Kohen. It becomes non-muksa and available even to the Israelite to move, so long as it is pure. Then we talked about demai, grain that we are uncertain of if it's been entirely processed with truma and meiser. So that was the second discussion. Now we're going to continue with the next item, which is Masar Rishon. Masar Rishon is it is the 10% that goes to our dear Levium. The way it would work in the temple times, as we've discussed before, is a farmer harvests the field, he gives a portion, something to the kohen, generally 2%. Then from the remainder, he gives 10% to the Levi. That's Meiser. That's called Meiser Rishon. Then there was an additional gift that went, an additional 10% that's brought up to Jerusalem, etc., etc. If Meiser is not taken, the grain is called Tevel. Now let's see over here. The Mishnah says, "Meiser Rishon shnitla trumasai," processed Meiser Rishon. Oh, I'm sorry. Now you give the Levi 10%. So Dr. Pasternak, Dr. Hammer, you think you can run right away to town and have a party. But unfortunately, there is one more prerequisite. You must first give a share to the kohen, and it's called Trumas Masar. It is the Truma. It is the share that the Levi gives to the kohen. Meiser Rishon, the 10% that goes to the Levi. Although it goes to the Levi, apparently, Dr. Hammer, you're allowed to invite over guests, and you can share with others, unlike Truma, which has a distinctly sanctified status. Now let's see the Gemara. Maser Rishon shnitla trumasai, the tithe that goes to the Levi that has already had the truma, the kohen's share, removed. Rashi, no. Pshita, is it not obvious? This is something that everyone can use. Why would you need to have a Mishnah to tell us you can move it around? The Gemara answers, Lo Pshita. I'm sorry, Lo Tzricha. Actually, there is some chiddush here. What's the chiddush? Shekdimo bishi boilem. That these grains were not prepared with truma for the original truma for the kohen. What does that mean? It means I believe that the Israelite who donated the grain to the Levi never gave the kohen his share. I believe that's what we're saying over here. How so?
Rabbi.
Hold on. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz here. The Levi preceded the priest, meaning the grain was still on the stalks. He brought it to the threshing floor. Well, this is the Gemara's language. Before the grain was threshed, the truma of the tithes were taken, and the truma gedol was not taken. Oh, here it spells out explicitly. While it was still in the ears of corn, nitle mena trumas masar. The Levi took his share. He gave trumas meiser. He gave the share to the kohen that he owed. But the original truma for the kohen was never taken. Rashi shnitla trumasay. What do we mean here? Shalevi nice in the kohen. So the assumption Rashi says is that everything was done properly. The chiddush we say is no. Even if there was a massive flaw in how these grains were processed, it would still not be muksa. You would still be allowed to handle it.
Rabbi.
Hold on. The reason why, the unique case over here is that the grain don't really become chayiv in truma until it is fully finished being processed. Here, while the grain was still in the process of being prepped, the Levi took a share and took his share and gave truma to the kohen from what he did, but there needed to be an initial truma, and that was never taken. So the order is out of balance. And of course, this is following the opinion of Rabbi Bahu, quoting Reish Lakish, who says, when you took the tithe, you took the 10% that goes to the Levi, while it was still on the stalks, and therefore, Pater mitruma gedayla, the kohen doesn't yet get his share. The way the pasuk describes the collection of truma, it needs to be only once it is separated. So there is a hypothetical where the initial truma is not taken and it is in accordance to halacha. The Levi gets his share. The kohen might be prevented or might escape getting a share of the truma. In which scenario? In a scenario where the grain is still, the stuff is still growing or it's still in the process, it hasn't been fully processed. Let's read Rashi. Shigdimu b'shibol, the trumas Yisrael. Really, you have to first give the kohen truma gedayla. The verse says, basically, there's a chronology of how these gifts are taken. First, bikurim is given, then truma is given. If you took tithes before truma, usually there are lashes. If the grain is now in its mound, where it's stored, in its silo, you get lashes. But if the grain has not been extracted and therefore it is not in its mound, and therefore you don't need to give, you're not yet chayiv to give the kohen his share, well, there is essentially a hack, a trick that leads to avoiding the kohen getting his truma. And this is not an ideal practice, but it is a halachic practice, certainly according to Reish Lakish. So again, just to recap, there is a scenario where a Levi gets his share and the kohen does not get his original share. He only gets the Levi's gift. So again, it's not that complicated, but just imagine you have 100%, that's your original yield. Ideally, you should finish the whole agricultural process and then give a portion to the kohen. Then you give 10% to the Levi. Then the Levi gives an additional 2% to the kohen. So the kohen gets a smaller share, but they doubled it. They get from the farmer and they also get from the Levi. Alan, don't get excited. It doesn't have to be the same kohen.
I have an IOU note from a long time ago.
But there is one hypothetical, Alan, where you and I can be cut out. If the tithe is taken while the grain is still on the stock, then the grain never had an obligation to give to the kohen. The Levi got his share. And so all we're going to get is the 2% on the 10% of the 100% and not the 2% on the 100%. So it's a whole lot less. In such a scenario, although it is unideal, you're allowed to move that grain.
Rabbi.
But the Kohen gets less because they're not as many Kohanim as Levine.
I'm sorry?
Since 2% of each farmer goes to Kohen, but they're not nearly
The
as many.
Kohen
Kohanim
gets
as
a
there are
whole lot
Levine.
less than the Levi, but I think as the demographics are concerned, there are also less Kohanim than Levine.
Exactly, yeah.
There's less
So
competition.
that's how it works out.
So I think it works out for the most part. Also, the Kohanim get many other gifts.
Rabbi.
Although,
Oh, our Levim today are very quiet. It would be good to if there's a Levi on this chat, we'd love to hear from you, your perspective.
Rabbi, I have a different question.
Yes.
I have a question of accuracy. It's easy to sit here, say 10%, 2%, 2% of 10, 10 of 2. It's on the field, it's not on the field. How accurate did these people have to be when they did it? Or they just did, like we said, 4 or 5?
It was the 10% was pretty accurate. And you know what? If you're a farmer who sells grain, you've figured out a way to be pretty precise about what you've got, what you have to sell. And so whatever way that these items are quantified, they figured it out. Rav Papa now challenges Abaya's explanation. What did Abaya explain? Oh, maybe Abaya is not here. No, I'm sorry. Rav Papa asked Abaya on this matter. I guess the challenge is essentially on Rabbi Abahu's drasha. Amalei Rav Papa Abaya. Rav Papa tells Abaya. By the way, interestingly enough, I believe Abaya was a kohen. Ihachi, based on the above, if we say that when the Levi cuts the line and takes his 10% before the kohen, and that's all right, and it's based on a verse that reads, Bari moisim min trumas Hashem maser min maser. Even in a scenario where the grain is prepped and the kohen should get his share. Even then, if the Levi skipped the line, it should be all right. To describe what you're trying to claim, it says, the pasuk says, Mikol matnei seichem tarimu, from all your gifts there should be truma, to tell us, I believe, that a Levi should not be skipping the line. In other words, the Levi would have to give 10%. No, hold on. The Levi would have to give truma from the top, I guess, of the yield. And then again, after he gets his 10%. I believe that's what we're saying. So basically, Abaya says, no, you cannot usually cut the Levi out. So Alan, you should feel a little better. Now, maybe Truma's Meiser. It says, Kol Trumas Hashem, Kol Mashma, Kol Tzatrum. Basically, if the Levi skips the coin in line, the Levi has to make it right. Marisa, why are you assuming that our Mishnah is talking about a case where we cut the line, but it was illegal cutting the line? Hi. Right? Let's read Rashi. Let's read Rabbi Steinholtz. What did you see? What did you see that led you to require Truma Gedolah from the first Meiser and not from the first Meiser? Oh, why do you say this is talking about when it was legal? Maybe you should even have to give Truma extra if you skip the line when it was within the legal framework. Myra Isa, hi, why did you suppose that the Levi only has to make things right when he skipped the line illegally? So the Gemara answers, hi, Igdon, v'hai lo Igdon. The only time that you'd have to make things right is if it is considered dogon. The verse says the word dogon, I believe. So therefore, says the Gemara, our Mishnah is talking about when it was within a legal framework. Rashi. Hi,
Rabbi?
Idyon. Hold on. Chalal of chayvas truma. Only once you're
Rabbi?
actually obligated to give truma, then the Levi would have to make right for skipping the line. Reishis legon
Rabbi?
hilkach shak Levi boy aduri lekayin trey imeyash leveration v'hader echad nasar. If the Levi skips the koyin or cuts out the koyin in a scenario where the koyin was meant to get my
Rabbi,
hold on one second.
the professor wants to say something.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question. When we are talking
Give me just
about
1 second, and then because I think we need a lot of discussing over here. Yeah. So when does the Levi need to make the koyin right for skipping the line, for cutting out the koyin? That's only if the koyin actually was into, if the grain they were dealing with is dagon, which is grain that's in a ready format, not when it is preemptively. Professor, go ahead. I'm sorry, I don't see everyone, so I didn't see you. I didn't hear you. Go ahead.
We are talking about skipping the line. We all know what it is in modern circumstances. How did it look like at the temple times? Did they have lists? Did they have managers? Did they have? How did they do that? That is, if there is a line, then we can skip it. But I assume there is no physical line.
Yes,
so
yes.
what prevents the coin to come and to pick up his portion? I'm not sure.
Professor, thank you for asking.
I presume some guys got a couple of shekels.
That's an important. No, this is an
Yeah.
important question, Professor. Number one, you're correct. There is not there wasn't necessarily a literal line. When I'm describing as a line, I really mean the biblically sanctioned chronology of gifting.
Right.
So there is a order of how ideally grain that grows is distributed. End of the line is the farmer. The farmer is at the end of the line, meaning whatever is left after all the gifts. I guess that's the way it works with taxes too, right? Whatever remains after all of the gifts, that's the farmer, is his family, he can sell, etc. So there is a chronology which ideally starts off like this: koyin. The kohen gets his share. That's called truma. Once the kohen gets his share and the truma is out of the picture, we recalculate the total yield that remains, and then 10% is deducted. So it's a slightly smaller amount than if you would calculate 10% with the 2% still part of it, I believe, right? Then I'm going to get myself in trouble with the math over here, but bottom line, the kohen skims off the top. Then the Levi skims 10% off the top. Now there's two different universes that we need to have a side-by-side screen. The farmer has now given 2% and 10%. They take an additional 10%, and that's for the farmer himself to invest or to spend in the Jerusalem economy. Now the farmer can go home and enjoy the rest of his stuff. Meanwhile, we have our Levi. Our Levi is carting off 10%. Now, it's possible that there's more than one Levi, but I just want to go through the chronology, and then we'll talk about how it was distributed. So now the Levi too needs to give a share of his gift to the Kohen. So not only the Israelite gives the Kohen something, but the Levite also gives something to the Kohen. Now, in a scenario where the Levi took 10% before the Kohen comes around, assuming the Kohen was entitled to his 2%, which the entitlement depends on where in the process of the grain processing would depend if the Kohen is biblically entitled or not. So then the Levi would need to give the Kohen twice. They would need to give the Kohen corresponding to what would have been removed prior to his receiving the tithe. And then he would have to give a second gift, which is the standard share of his gift. How are these grains distributed? So it is the right of the owner, of the farmer, to give to whoever he would like. So there is a description of how the Kohen and the Levi will be machzir achar agranot. During the harvest season, there would be a proliferation of Kohenim and Leviim going around, hoping and seeking to collect their dues. One could imagine that if you were a farmer and you had a buddy, a childhood friend who was a Kohen or a Levi, or nephew or whatever you would give to that relative, and that was fine. Why did Hashem make it so that the Kohen and the Levi are wandering around like modern day, and I want to use this word very respectfully, schnorrers, collecting alms? And of course, all of us have encountered folks that are collecting, and Dr. Stamler, I think, has a degree in navigating and dealing with what we might describe as a schnorrer, or a more respectful term would be, give me a more respectful term, Dr. Stamler.
Fundraiser.
A fundraiser, okay.
No, schnorrer is right.
As a fundraiser, I like to differentiate between someone who is collecting for themselves or for Salman Kolel versus someone that's funding specific causes. But okay, that's fair. So why is it that the Kohen and Levi have to wander around like a schnorrer? So actually, it is brought that it was intentional. Hashem desires the Kohen and Levi have a task, not just to receive, but also to communicate and to educate. And so by having them traveling around across Israel, it creates a culture and an economy where the Kohen comes to the house to collect his truma. He also has to share Dvar Torah. They say, oh, Kohen, while you're here, I need to ask you a question. We built a new door. Does it get a mezuzah? Can you look at my tefillin? Does the knot look kosher? And so there is a two-way street here being created where the olden day Kohen and Levi, who were ideally more educated because they were hanging out in Jerusalem, or at least spent some time there, this would create this connection between the center of Israel and the periphery, create a connection between those who were ostensibly, ideally more educated, and the working folks who didn't have time necessarily to have a full education, but very much valued
Rabbi,
life and teachings. And I guess someone might say that that would be the ideal benefit of today's culture of schnorring, although I'm sure some would beg to differ, and the jury is out on.
Rabbi,
Yes.
my guess is that they could have been looked upon as tax collectors.
In a sense, yeah, I guess so. Also, I want to point out, although maybe I didn't make it with my portrayal, I didn't make that clear, is that the Kohanim and the Leviim were dispersed across Israel in Israelite towns. And so it's not necessarily that you had one Kohen literally traveling across the entire state of the country of Israel. You probably had regional routes. And Dr. Stamler, I don't know if there were drivers who would take the Kohanim to all the juicy, hot farming stations to collect. I don't know, but that is the culture. Professor.
This description assumes the existence of the Jewish state in which the Romans are not present. And Romans also collected taxes.
Yes.
And I think that even the Israeli king also collected taxes. So how what's the procedure to divide or to separate or to do the taxes that go to the Roman are deducted first, and the rest is done to what remains, or what's the other way around?
I'll tell you, I'm a little less certain with this because I think it probably varied from time and place and region. What we do know is that generally taxes were a communal burden. This is from the time of the Romans until more recent times, when you had Jewish settlements with licenses to live in Germany and the different kingdoms in the area where they had to give a certain amount of taxes. So I believe those were, the community had to give X amount, and the community had to internally collect those items. So assuming that we're dealing with a halachic community, I imagine they would probably have to give the Truma and Meiser first, but I am not entirely certain, and I think it probably varied from time and place, but it was a real. It's Professor, your question is perfect because it reminds us how we always have the ideal arrangement on paper, and then sometimes reality makes it a whole lot more messy. And I think your question is where the what do they say, where the shovel hits or whatever, when you hit the pavement,
Something hits the fan.
or yeah, Rebbe Allen HaKoyin.
I was wondering what happened. Weren't the poor people supposed to get portions also?
Yes. So there were additional shares that the poor people
Corners
got,
and everything else?
and every third year the Meiser Sheni, I believe, would go to the poor people, but there was also many other institutions that were created for the poor people. So if you left a bundle in the field, or you dropped a stalk of grain and you had a corner, a peya, so there was plenty for the impoverished as well. But I guess the difference between an impoverished person and the Kohen and Levi is the Kohen and Levi was almost formally the responsibility of society to provide for them. And it was an exchange, at least in the concept. The Torah describes the Levi, they were not given real estate to farm, or not sufficient farming opportunities. And this was intentional so that they would be dependent on the people, and they would represent the people as they serviced or served the function of in the Beis Hamikdash.
Rabbi,
Yes.
human nature being what it is, do we have any incidents where there's a dispute which coin is entitled to the particular truma?
I'm sure there is a discussion of who has the right to make those decisions. But I do want to add one other thing, which is that in a sense, Truma and Meiser was, I believe, a self-reporting situation. So Truma and Meiser was something that each person was individually responsible for. However, it was not that simple, because grain that did not have the Truma and Meiser, didn't have a Kohen and a Levi taken care of, is considered problematic, unkosher grain. And so there became a secondary conversation, which I probably should have brought up sooner, because we've discussed it already, is the question of tevel, demai, and grain that is misukan. Tevel means grain that has not yet seen its gifts to the Kohen and Levi, and that is utterly unkosher. You, the end user, the purchaser who buys tevel, who buys grain from a farmer who does not give gifts to the Kohen and Levi, you now need to go ahead and give those gifts to the Kohen and Levi before you're allowed to eat it. But then you have demai. Demai means we're not sure if it was prepped or not. And that's a whole nother discussion. So ultimately, the grain, what goes to the Kohen and Levi and who gets it, that's entirely up to the owner. But there's another question about the trustworthiness of the vendor or person that's serving you food. And here comes one of the big class clashes, the big class issues that existed in the temple times, which is you had, and this apparently, those who study Second Temple history and literature and the different sectarian groups, it seems like this was a societal reality across the different sectors, different reasons. But in the Chazal, in the halachic culture, you had groups of people that were called a chaver. They were fully accepted into the society of halachically trustworthy individuals, and you could trust that they would take truma and meiser, they would give the gifts, as well as any statement or declaration about ritual purity. But you had other groups of people who we describe as Am Haaretz, the average populace. These were people who may have been less educated, but they may have been educated, but less committed, or at least not, they weren't certified as trustworthy in the matter of giving the gifts of Truma and Meiser, as well as ritual purity and impurity. The reason why I say this was across society is because we read the Qumran documents, and when we read that sect's groups, it's clear that they too had an inner group of people that were full members of the group and trustworthy, and it was a lengthy process. I think it was like a three years probation, and it also had other hallmarks of a cult, in that, if I'm not mistaken, the Qumran sect, they had to give all of their possessions into a joint pot. But the point is that you had such an idea of being a chaver, an accepted member or under probation in that sect, and I believe others as well. And so it seems like this was a common societal structure where you had the group, and then you had like the inner circle of fully trustworthy people who paid the price. Maybe it was a pound of flesh, or an economic investment, or also a vigorous vetting period. And well, that's a little bit about.
I know today also the Boyer community has the concept of a chaver.
I'm sorry.
The Boyer community today has also the concept of the chaver.
And what does the chaver mean in that
And
community?
I'm not so sure. I have a friend who is part of the Boyer. I have to ask him. I'll call him.
It probably doesn't mean much more than like a member.
No.
Oh, no?
Not everybody gets to become a chaver. It is a prestigious degree that is bestowed upon you by the community. Not everybody becomes a chaver. I'll have to ask him.
Could you not have Yekish descent and become a chaver?
I'm sorry?
Could you be not of Yeki descent and become a chaver?
Good question. I don't know.
Because I know that they strongly work to preserve the minhagim and the style and the culture and the
Frankfurt am Main and Let me ask you a different question. Today, halachically, from a halachic point of view, and that goes to the professor's question. Today, halachically, when you're supposed to tithe for tzedakah. How do you figure that out? Before taxes, after taxes?
You're asking about the ma'aser that we give from our income at 10%?
Yes. Well, generally that's the recommended.
Well, first of all, to be clear, as a rabbi, I strongly encourage everyone to give ma'aser, but we do need to be clear that it is not mamish identical to the ma'aser of agriculture. The ma'aser of agriculture was biblical in Israel. The maser ksafim that we give is more of a neder. It's a very important and good thing, but it doesn't have quite the biblical weight. I just want to be clear about that. And
how are you supposed to calculate it?
I think it's usually what you take home, not necessarily. Somebody asked me a question. He bought a house a year ago and he sold it. And he believes that he needs to give meiser on the proceeds, even though he's buying another house. But the question is, can he deduct the repairs that he did to the home, the taxes that he paid, if there were other assessments? So I told him to speak to I sent him off to another Rav who specializes in monetary matters. I told him I was in a geya bedavar because he told me he's going to give the meiser to the shul. So I said, I don't want to be part of that deliberation. But it's a good question. All right, let's do a little more Gemara. Umaiser Sheni. So now we're moving on to Meiser Sheni. What is Meiser Sheni? Meiser Sheni, for 4 years of a 7-year cycle, belongs to the farmer and he goes to Israel. And on the 2 off years, it goes to the aniyim, to the poor people. So as we know, the agricultural cycle was a 7-year cycle. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then Shemitah, where you didn't do your agricultural business. And so the first 2 years goes to Yerushalayim. I believe the 3rd year went to the Ani. Then the 4th and 5th year went to Yerushalayim, and then the 6th year to the Ani. Again, this is in addition to the other matnas aniyim, the other things that go to the Ani. So it says that you're allowed to move Maser Sheni. So the Gemara asks a question which should already be familiar. Pshita, of course you can handle Maser Sheni. Because the Mishnah continues, Maser Sheni and Kadashim Sheniftu, that it has been redeemed. And now I have to give another introduction. Meiser Sheni was 10% of the grain. Once you've already subtracted 2% and 10%. And this again belonged to the owner. And as I described it, it was meant to be given an infusion of either capital or food to the Jerusalem economy, well, you have two choices. You can either literally cart down all that wheat, all that grain, all that produce to Yerushalayim and throw a party. But sometimes the shipping fees would be more than the cost of the produce, let's say, or it was just very bulky or whatever. So they would be able to exchange and transfer the sanctity or the designation of the Meiser Sheni from the grain to funds. The funds are then brought to Yerushalayim and spent in Jerusalem, and this grain becomes pariv, becomes available for a regular use. So if it's available for regular use, the Gemara asked Pshita, of course you can handle it, of course you can move it. It's just like anything else. So the Gemara answers, no, we're making this is a chiddush. Loitzricha, the chiddush here is shenosan es a keren v'loinosan es a chaymesh. When you designate or transfer the sanctity of the grain onto funds, you had to pay an additional transfer fee, which was another 5%. I'm sorry, a fifth, so it's 20%, right? So there was an additional fee. If you want to transfer your grain to funds, you want to spend it in Yerushalayim, you had to tack on an additional fee. Our scenario here is you transfer the principal, but you never transferred or added to it the chomesh. Maybe you would think the transaction is canceled. It's null and void. The chiddush of our Mishnah is that although you didn't give the 5%, one can yet handle the grain because it has already been transferred and the sanctity is no longer on the grain. It is on the funds, and you can now eat these produce without any problem or hesitation. This is the next segment of our Gemara. Tosfos tells us, there's other places in the Gemara where we have this question, and we don't resolve this question so simply that it is not ma'akev. But the Tosfos says that's because the Gemara had another answer that it could have given to that specific conversation. But for the purposes of our Gemara and for the purposes of halachic clarity, although you certainly should give the extra fifth, if one didn't do so, it's not ma'akev. Now, it gets a little more exciting. Spoke about dry lupine, termos hayavish. Oh no, it's the next one that's interesting. I mean, this is also interesting, but it was the next one that was fun. Dry turpine. Gemara says, Dafke yavish. Dafke yavish, it needs to be dry. The Mishnah says yavesh. Inferred from there, avalach loy. But if it was wet, if it was moist, if it was still fresh, you cannot move it. My taima, what's wrong if it is lach, if it is moist? Kivan the mar loy achla. The answer is you're using it to feed goats. When it is moist, when it is fresh, when it is wet, it's so bitter, even animals will not consume it. And therefore, it's muksa. You can't do anything with it till it dries up. That's why our Mishnah Dafka talks about turmos, a dry lupine. I don't know what a lupine is, but I believe turmos is a kind of bean. Alan, have you explained to us what turpine is?
Lupine.
I'm sorry,
Lupine.
Lupine, dry lupine. Do we know what lupine is?
$6.29 a pound.
Oh, I'm seeing $9.99 a pound for the cine. So I don't know. Are those is lupini and lupine the same?
Lupini beans.
Let's look at Rabbi Steinsaltz. Maybe he'll help us out. I'm sure he will. Odaka. No, Maybe we discussed it before. I don't remember. Alan, you have anything? Is Alan here? Alan, do you advise eating dry lupine?
I haven't tried it yet, but I'll give it to my wife.
You see, Google, there's good questions that people ask. Can lupines be dried? Yes. How toxic is it?
I'll let you know when my wife eats it.
It can be toxic. Oi, Alan, this is recorded, you know.
Yeah, you have to make sure Maser was taken before you eat the lupine.
Well, I don't know. Let's see. Dry lupine goats. Let's see. Oh, you
How
see?
about, why
It's-
don't why don't you Google lupine bean, B-E-A-N, Thomas. It's a legume. Google that, you'll have,
Well, what I'm seeing here is that cattle could be poisoned by eating lupins or lupines. But goats, according to Colorado State University, goats are resistant. Hold on, let's just try this. Goats, here. Goats are quite resistant to the toxic effects of lupines. Oh. So for that reason, you'd hold on to your lupines for goats because they're not impacted by the toxicity. However, when it's moist, even the goats don't want to eat it. All right. Now let's see a little more. Anyone recall what we said? Tevel was unprocessed, unprepped, untithed grain. The Levi wasn't provided for. The Kohen wasn't provided for. You cannot eat it. You cannot therefore move it. Pshita, the Gemara says, of course it's muksa. Of course you can't use it. There's nothing you could do with it in the world. Excuse me. Oh, by the way, we're on 128 now. Our answer is like tzicha, no. There is a scenario where this is actually a chiddush. Tevel, tovul, midrabanan. Where only midrabanan, it needs to be given, it needs trumas and maasros taken. Midoraisa is exempt. You might think that being that biblically you're allowed to handle it, you should be not muksa. What's the scenario? You planted these plants not in the ground, but in a flower pot. And now we have to ask about hydroponics, which I don't know the answer, but I think hydroponics, I think they are exempt from certain.
It's grown with just water. There's no dirt. There's no soil at all.
Right.
So that,
But if you recall, we learned the Gemara, we said a root could even be raised above the ground, but there's some kind of conceptual drawing of moisture, of elements, I don't know. So even though maybe biblically it doesn't need to have, you don't need to give Trum and Meiser. Chazal say you do. So it's called Tuvul Derabanan, Tuvul Derabanan. Only rabbinically it is unprepped. Nonetheless, we call it Muksa. Then the Gemara, the Mishnah continues. Nor can you handle grain that was gifted to the Levi, but the Levi didn't make the Kohen whole. Shita, isn't it obvious? You got to make the Kohen whole. You got to give the Kohen his share, his fair share. La yitzricha. The chiddush here is shektimu b'kri. In this scenario, the Levi took his tithes before the grain was fully processed and in a silo environment. So therefore, the Kohen was never chayiv to get his share. The Levi went ahead and took 10% then. And the Levi simply didn't give the Kohen his share. I might think that as Rav Papa said, being that the Kohen wasn't made whole, maybe the Kohen doesn't need to be made whole. Kamash Malon, like Abaye said earlier, Gemara, that the Levi has to still give the Kohen his share. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz here. Maybe you'll think, like our Papa said, that the produce should be exempt to separate the Truma Gedolah. Kamash Malon, you have to give the Kohen his share. And therefore, you cannot move it until you do. So give me 1 second, folks. I'm sorry.
Rabbi? Can you hear me? No.
Sorry, folks. Doctor,
Rabbi,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
You say give the Kohen, give the Levi. You don't have to give it to one Levi or one Kohen, do you?
That's true.
That's one question.
Correct. I should be saying give the Kohanes or give the Levies. Yes.
I understand. But my question is sort of the analogy we gave to tzedakah almost. Okay. There's a giver and there's a receiver.
Yes.
Okay. Is there any due diligence? Guy's doing his field. You say, hi, Shalom Aleichem, I'm a Levi. No. Oh, I gave already. Or I'm sorry, but I have a Levi that I've given for the last 20 years.
So to my knowledge, the Israelite is entirely entitled to give to who he wishes. And it's a self-reporting process. So
Right.
I don't think you can come and say, hey, farmer, you owe me. You could say, farmer, FYI, I'm a Levi. Do you have anything for me? And then the farmer can say, now the other question I don't have the answer to. And the question is, what vetting process is there to be certain that the guy who's coming to say he's a Levi is actually a Levi? Do you have to have a blue certificate from the VAD that says that you've been certified as a Levi? I believe there was some kind of certification process. I don't think it was a certificate per se. Maybe you'd have to be someone that was known to you to be a Levi. But that's an important question. I don't have the specifics of the answer. I think we need to look back on the Rambam.
But were there any?
Sorry?
But there were no non-compete clauses in the areas of Jerusalem that are very kind of busy for
Thinking
people
of like a high density area.
Yeah.
You had to
Rabbi,
secure.
I don't know if I remember correctly, but I remember a discussion at the Talmud if somebody claims to be a coin.
Right.
So maybe there's something similar.
Well, there was a vetting process to be allowed to work in the Beis Hamikdash. There was an exhaustive vetting process, and there was actually a special Sanhedrin whose primary task was researching the heritage and establishing the how do you call it? Establishing
Authenticity.
The authenticity of a kohen or Levi. And there were families that were miyuchasim, and there were families that needed to have research done. And today, and especially today, when rabbis officiate a wedding, one of the most important things that a rabbi must do, I mean, this was always the case, but today it's much more essential because there's a whole lot more involved, is the rabbi needs to be certain that both applicants are actually Jewish. And today there are many Batei Dinim that specialize in this. And so it allows the community rabbi to, outsource the research, which also allows the rabbi not to be the bearer of bad news, which does happen sometimes. And usually to establish Judaism, depending on which region or country one comes from, there are different, documents or evidence that could be presented. And it's a process. And the same is, by the way, for the Rabbanut in Israel. If you want to get married by the Rabbanut in Israel, you also have to establish your Jewishness. And anyways, so Ein Chadash Tachas Hashemesh. I think we're going to stop right here. Tomorrow we'll pick up discussing a little more about Meiser Sheni, the tithe that's brought to Jerusalem, how it's processed, and we'll have the opportunity to take a look at some ancient, what coins in times past might have looked like. And so that is today's Gemara.
I might have a problem tomorrow.
Oh, actually, hold on. Roberto, go ahead, because actually, I'm sorry. I'm glad you reminded me. What's your problem?
I'll be on the California time, so we'll see what's.
No, I'm sorry. I just remembered something. I have a problem. A year ago, I called my dentist and I said, I want an appointment. No, it's not my dentist. The dentist next door. I haven't been to a dentist in many years. And they said, okay, I'll put you down. How does July, whatever, sound like at 9 o'clock? I'm like, perfect. I'll be out by 10. Yeah. A year later, we moved the time of this year and I forgot about it, but I think I don't want to cancel the appointment that's been a year in the making. So, give me one second.
I'll be gone also.
Give me one second. I just want to make sure that's the time. I don't want to cancel, but I might.
Although Rabbi, Dr. Stamler does teledentistry. If you open your mouth, we can do it quick.
Okay, but hold on. Here's what we'll do. We're going to ask Dr. Stamler, what do you say? Should I cancel the shir or should I cancel the appointment?
Do not cancel the appointment. I didn't tell you to cancel the shir. All I said is don't cancel the appointment.
You just have to make sure that the dentist takes maser from the fee.
So I'm sorry to do this, but you know what? I'm gonna have to call tomorrow off.
Okay.
I apologize. So what's today? Tuesday. Tomorrow's Wednesday. So I guess we're gonna resume on Thursday. I'm sorry. This one
Okay,
thing
I
didn't-
can't make it either.
Okay, good. So to honor Alan and their barrel. No. Thank you so much. So that's what we'll do. We'll meet up on Thursday, same time, same link. And I apologize. We'll miss y'all tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.
Be well, everybody.
Dr. Stamler, thank you for your guidance.
I'll give you another piece of advice. You should see the dentist every 6 months, not once a year.
Well, this is once in many years. That's why I don't want to cancel it. All right, everyone. I shouldn't put all my confessions online. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Recording's still on too.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you. See you Thursday.
Hope all goes